Okay, well, thank you, everybody. It's a real treat to catch up with a new generation, new set of ideas about Sloan. Here's another fond memory of Helen Farr Sloan. Meeting her for lunch in her little book-filled office, was it in the basement at the Delaware Art Museum? She wanted to talk with every researcher. She was so thrifty and didn't want to waste any time, so she brought homemade sandwiches wrapped in wax paper for both of us. Passing Helen's fact checks was an accomplishment indeed, because she always had to see drafts and correct dates. Okay. Now that Helen and others have made available a wealth of archival material, and the DAM and other institutions have cataloged it and digitized it, research grows. Along with digital searching of turn of the 20th century periodicals, it makes possible the subtle interpretations we've heard in this morning's papers. Each of this morning's scholars has mined previously overlooked letters and diaries, read deeply in the period press, and conducted revealing visual analyses. And that's part of what I learned the most from this morning, was the way each of our speakers looked at and put words to what they were seeing. Okay. This is also true of recent scholarship on Sloan by Michael Lobel, Alexis Boylan, and David Peters Corbett. What emerges is informed by contemporary concerns with the body, race and sexuality, and international contexts, as we'll be hearing later. We find a more complex, sometimes troubled and troubling Sloan. What follows is appreciation and some questions for the speakers. Okay. John Fagg's paper on Ashcan nudes takes up a recurrent conundrum. Does one think of images of the nude as a symbol of artistic effort, invoking the heritage in the West of classical art and the academy? Or as naked and embodied people, as a realist artist would seek? As titillating? Or all of the above? He helps us understand what was at stake for Henry and Sloan in painting the nude. To devotees of Whitman, the nude came to stand for bodily and sensual frankness, and eventually as a challenge to comstockery. The Ashcan artist could then turn the tables and accuse the viewers of conventional artistic nudes of seeing pornographically. These thoughts in some way recall Thomas Akins's Whitman-inflected espousal of beauty and the nude body. Yet Henry rejected Akins's teaching methods, which were seen as too medical and too meticulous an approach to the human body. This embrace of the unscienced may be a bit of what we are talking about as creative misprision on Henry's part. His own teaching eventually was very systematic in its own way. Be curious about that. We also learn that Henry expressed disappointment that models at the Académie Julienne were almost always men, which leads me to the first of my questions for John. What difference did it make that Henry and Sloan chose to paint female nudes almost exclusively, while Akins, as a painter, had celebrated the bodies of men? Was it important to Sloan and Henry that the nude embody their love of beauty, but also their love of women? Okay. John's paper helps us think about how, in the realist works of Sloan and Bellows, nude people are seen engaged in some activity, as if caught unawares. Perhaps that's what's unnerving about the studies of models from 1913. They break the illusion of women absorbed in their own worlds. The confrontation with the 14-year-old Miss Wenzel seems impatient and uncomfortable, as John points out. It heightens the artificiality of the model's pose, and I wonder if it exposes the caste nexus and class difference at the heart of the relationship. This distinction helps us understand the splendidly intimate and knowing drawing of Dolly in the bath, about which I'd like to know more. As with several of the Ashcan nudes, she's busy. Here, maybe painting her fingernails, and I was Googling frantically last night, history of nail polish, when does this start? Maybe somebody knows. The faucet, soap dish, and bottle of nail polish maybe reminds us what we often enjoy with Sloan's illustrator skills, the telling details and apparatus of modern daily life. Why was it possible for Sloan to make these drawings that capture his subject on the left in a few strokes, but so difficult for him to confront a model? Perhaps in the former, intimacy revealed. And in the latter, the auspiciousness of making art got in the way. Okay. James Glisson's paper follows nicely on the keynote we heard last night in his telling analysis of how the coffee line does and does not constitute Sloan's version of a Whistler nocturne brought down, as James Glisson says, brought down to earth. As James notes, the picture simultaneously casts a Whistlerian aesthetic haze, yet invokes a loaded subject. By setting its phalanx of homeless men against the lights and luxury buildings that surround Madison Square, the picture offers insight into Sloan's evolving social consciousness. This is persuasive. The subject and its aesthetic treatment then fight against each other in interesting ways. In another shrewd reading, James contrasts two versions of urban crowds, one in the pastel crush at Brooklyn Bridge by Shin, and the second in its margins. In one, the crowd appears as a mass, in the other, a frantic tangle of individuals. This then leads into an extensive analysis of the period's theories of crowd psychology. What I don't yet see, and would encourage James Glisson to clarify, is how these crowd theories connect back to the way the coffee line frames and distances its subject. Passages cited from E.A. Ross and others suggest that crowd frenzy spreads as if by contagion to overwhelm the individual. Does this picture's positioning of its viewer as separate from the crowd reveal the artist's fear of losing his personality in the city? I'm not sure. Is it important in this painting to distinguish one class from another? If so, how would one read the implied relation to the crowd in Sloan's slightly later painting, Election Night? Okay, those are questions for James. Of this morning's papers, Margarita Karasoulis's work most closely works with the theme of international aspects in John Sloan's art. It smartly invokes research on New York's ethnic history and the creation of Chinatowns as sites for negotiation of the urban other. In her words, the gustatory appeal of Chinese food contributed to a sensory construction of race, great phrase. She thus asks us to think of the turn of the century fascination with urban Chinatowns in terms of both spatial and racial difference. In some of my favorite passages, she considers how these works by Sloan and Shin exoticize and differentiate the act of eating. Each highlights certain patrons who practically inhale their food. They're not the only people there, but they're the ones we notice. They dispense with the niceties of forks and knives. As Margarita reminds us, while on the one hand, the Chinese in the United States were stereotyped using accusations of disgusting habits of eating dogs and rats. On the other hand, tourists and impecunious artists found the food on offer in Chinese restaurants irresistible. This pairing brings me to two questions for Margarita. One involves geography. In the work by Shin, if the date's right, it's always hard to tell with Shin, we see Chinese diners joking with a Chinese waitress. Their dress and posture separates them from the others in the room. In Sloan's, made some years later, we see some of the same sorts of white couples, but no Chinese people are there. It refers to a restaurant not in Chinatown, but in Sloan's neighborhood on 6th Avenue. Please tell us more about this. Did the same factors of immersive slumming and spatial difference apply after the so-called onward march of chop suey brought Chinese restaurants, but not Chinese residents, to predominantly white neighborhoods further uptown? Which leads me to wonder more, here's the other question, about the Chinese entrepreneurs behind the businesses. As the paper notes, Chinese restaurants were part of a production of race through the construction of exoticized space. What relation did the red lacquered decor and lanterns have to actual restaurants in China? And how did they signify once they were located in neighborhoods away from the district of Chinatown? Was all this invented for foreign consumption? More food for thought. Margarita must get this all the time, okay? And more opportunity for discussion. So let's have some questions and maybe some response from the speakers.